Welcome to God at Work, Stories of Grace and Faith. I'm your host, CharlesGruver, and in this episode, I take a look at what is probably more of a writer of Southern gospel music rather than an actual hymn writer. And though I have seen at least one of his songs used as a hymn, which is also actually one of my favorite songs of his. The writer I'm talking about is Albert E. Brumley, and at least for me, if you've heard any of his songs, the one that you have probably heard is the song I'll Fly Away. Albert E. Brumley was born on October 29th, 1905 to hardworking tenant farmers, William Sherman and Sarah Isabel Brumley, in the pre-Dust Bowl, Oklahoma, near the town of Spiro. He spent most of his early life chopping and picking cotton on the family farm, and most would have actually predicted that young Brumley would have continued on to become a sharecropper just like his father. In school, he was the painfully shy and skinny kid, which his skinniness will kind of play a little bit more of a role in his future, who basically showed no signs of any real greatness, and he also pretty much had no idea what his destiny would be. It would be actually several years later after working as a sharecropper that Albert would start to realize his calling to music. And while some actually viewed the life of a sharecropper to be pretty much one step up from slavery, the Brumleys, Albert's parents, didn't hold this view. His parents actually had strong religious beliefs, which included the belief that hard work, such as that of a sharecropper, was honorable and noble, which was also pretty much instilled into young Albert. Albert's father, William, was also a respectable fiddle player. So, growing up, music was also prevalent around the home, especially after supper. As a growing boy and a young man, Albert worked hard and would also eat heartily, yet he never really muscled up like most of his peers in that area did. So he was always the skinny kid, and oftentimes the butt of jokes because of his size. Yet despite this, he became pretty much a big man in the music scene eventually. And one thing that was mentioned about him was the first thing people would notice about him was his rich bass voice. He was a good cotton picker and actually enjoyed the simple farm ways while he was growing up. He also knew it took courage to be a farmer and admired those who actually did so, which he would also use his observations about farming and a lot of the imagery that he took in later in life as part of his music career. At the age of 16, Albert became determined to write gospel music and composed his first song, I Can Hear Them Singing Over There, which wouldn't be published for about another 6 years, and he first saw it in print when it was published in a 1927 convention book titled Gates of Glory. Going back a year, in 1926, Albert actually made the decision to leave Oklahoma and head to Hartford, Arkansas to receive an education and basically get started in the music world with the help of what he considered a good Samaritan, uh, who's by the name of Eugene Monroe Bartlett, who just happened to be the owner of the Hartford Music Company and also the director of the Hartford Music Institute. And the need for a Good Samaritan was because, coming from near poverty, such as Albert was, formal music training was just about an unthinkable luxury. But Albert decided to give it a try, and in early of 1926 he left home wearing basically only wearing his suit, paid 50 cents for a bus ticket, arriving in the coal mining town of Hartford, Arkansas, with about $2.50 to his name. He located the institute and went in, actually talked with Bartlett. From what I saw in some of the resources, it was pretty much a conversation of, I'm here to take music lessons, I hear that you don't have to pay, or something along those lines, and Bartlett pretty much said, do you have the money for tuition? It's $5. He said no. Bartlett says, do you have money for room and board? And Brumley basically says, I have no money whatsoever. And this first encounter with Bartlett was memorable to Brumley, because not having the money for tuition or housing, Bartlett basically allowed young Brumley to stay at his place. So basically, he put him up in his own house. Bartlett put Brumley up in his own house, at least for that first stint of his time there at the Institute. And the two actually developed a friendship that lasted until Bartlett's death in 1941. Brumley started his studies in January of 1926 and continued them until the spring of 1927. I didn't see anything where it said where he went after the spring of 1927, but he didn't make it back that fall to resume, but he resumed his education in 1928 and actually continued on until 1931. In 1926, Albert also started teaching singing schools, would also travel to conventions and sang, among other things in the music industry. And it was actually at one of these schools in Powell, Missouri, that he met a woman by the name of Goldie Shell, who he married in 1931, and after marrying, they pretty much settled there in Powell, Missouri. She was a constant source of encouragement and was the perfect wife for the basically immensely talented, creative, and slightly eccentric musical genius that Brumley was. To describe Albert Brumley as unorganized was pretty much an understatement. He would work on multiple songs at the same time, never remembering where he left the last song he was working on, and writing ideas on scraps of paper, throwing them away, only to later go back to retrieve them from the wastebasket. Basically, his organizational technique was to the point that no amount of office space or filing could really help him. But his wife Goldie actually pretty much became what was considered his walking filing cabinet. He also would often bounce song ideas off of his wife, basically humming tunes for her approval. She never really gave any input as to words for the songs, because in her view, the composition, the words, were basically Albert's exclusive domain. she gave him basically full control over the words. She basically would approve the tune, I guess. The only exception to the words of the songs being Albert's domain would he would often seek advice from his father-in-law, Joe Shell, who was also a strong religious man, very steeped in the Bible, and oftentimes his approaching Joe was in regards to making sure his his songs were actually biblically accurate. So his gospel songs, he wanted to make sure that not only were they uplifting to God, but he wanted to make sure that they were biblically accurate as well. There was, in the resources that I have, there was an indication of where he actually approached Joe with the title of one of his songs about the title had something to do with salvation coming, and the way he originally wrote the title had salvation in the future as coming in the future, and his father-in-law looked at him and said, salvation has already come. So he changed, because of that, he actually changed the title, changed some of the words in the title of the song to reflect that. Again, these resources will be in the show notes, so if you want to go and dig deeper into his life. One thing I did notice when I was talking about that kind of year that he took off from his musical education, it was during that time away from school in 1927 that he did write the song I'll Fly Away. And besides that, he also composed more than 700 songs, including I'll Meet You in the Morning, Jesus Hold My Hand, The Blood That Stained the Old Rugged Cross, Sometimes It's Hard to Understand, Turn Your Radio On, and If We Never Meet Again. To be honest, I'm not sure if I've heard any of those other songs that I just mentioned except for Turn Your Radio On, but that's because growing up my parents listened to the Statler Brothers a lot, and that was one song that I heard them singing a lot of times was Turn Your Radio On. I think also Ray Stevens may have done that song as well. But even though his works are considered Southern gospel, they have been performed by various types of musicians, including groups such as the Chuck Wagon Gang, who actually claim to be the first commercial recording of I'll Fly Away. The Boston Pops Orchestra and the Oak Ridge Boys, as well as artists such as Elvis Presley, Charlie Pride, the Ray Charles Singers, and George Jones. Next time, I will probably look further into the story, kind of the story behind I'll Fly Away, how it came about, some, I guess, facts about it that are kind of interesting, around who all's recorded some of the more prominent recordings of it and everything. But for now, that was Albert E. Brumley. This is CharlesGruver, and that's God at Work. God at Work, Stories of Grace and Faith, is brought to you by Becoming God's Man Ministries, and is written and produced by CharlesGruver. If you have any questions, comments, or stories of how God has worked in your life that you would like to share, you can contact us at stories@godatworkpodcast.com or by leaving a voicemail or texting 727-315-0830. If you would like to support God at Work or Becoming God's Man Ministries, you can find out how by going to either godatworkpodcast.com or becominggodsman.com. Opening theme is Fine Line, and closing theme is Airline both by Geographer and obtained from the YouTube audio library. And as always, thank you for listening.